Some people want to write a book to build a community. Others, it's to raise funds for a cause. Others, it's to get more clients. Others, it's to communicate a vision. There's so many different ways to spin that. What I try to tell people is keep it very consistent. Don't do too many different calls to action. Like if you've got a lot of different products or a lot of different offers, don't do that. Make this book tied to an offer that's going to lead to ultimately to your big ticket offer. If you can lead directly to it, like if you're a consultant and you work with Fortune 100 companies, well, then any executive reading that book is going to have a pretty good idea what your call to action is. Just make it your call to action.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to View from the Top podcast, where we help business owners and entrepreneurs get through the valleys and climb up the mountain to get their own view from the top. So we're glad you're all listening in today. My name is Kevin, also known as Wally Wallenbeck, and I've got Big A Walker with us today.
Wally, you're going to have, it's Aaron. It's not Aaron. You emphasize the wrong. It's not
Aaron.
No. It's Aaron.
No, I can't.
Aaron.
Aaron.
And the reason it's Aaron and not Aaron is because my mom said it's Aaron. And so.
Is that because, so was that something that was intentional, or was it her accent, or was it?
How do I know? I wasn't here then. Like I wasn't born, and she named me. Did you ever ask her? So, no, I'll make that top priority tomorrow. I'll ask.
Yeah, I doubt that.
After 62 years, why? Hey, you been doing good? Things going well?
Yeah, I'm doing well, man.
Wally, just say Wally and Big A. Nobody messes that up.
That's true. That's why we went with that, actually, right? So that works well. Yeah, I've had a pretty good week. We had last week we had Brian on, and Brian Manager, and that was pretty good. He was talking about some hiring some family members, and we asked them some questions around that. And it just got me thinking. We actually, the company that we work in, View from the Top, we have family members, and actually looking to hire another family member here soon that's related, right? In an area of the company that they're qualified to be in. But that's raised some questions about, we had conversations about hiring family members in the past and firing that. I fired my son-in-law, not my son-in-law. I fired my brother-in-law before, and he ended up coming back to work for me after a couple of years. But
what's funny though is I've fired most members of my family. Like I've had all of Robin's sisters work for me, my nieces and nephews, and I've had everybody under the sun. Nobody's ever come back though. It's like when I fired them, it was over. Over. You know what? Here's the thing, and we talked about this the other day, is that like we want to help people in our family do better, right? And we love being around our family. I just want to caution people to be careful. Just be mindful. Like, don't let it interfere with your personal relationships, and handle it in a really diplomatic, business-like manner, and really have it understood what the expectations are. A lot of people think they get a free pass when they're family. And I used to say, hey, it's even twice as bad on you because I expect more out of you. And oftentimes it can go south on you. So yeah, give the family members a chance, but be sure they're qualified, first of all, to do the job. Be sure
that's really important. I think the qualified part,
if they're not qualified, I don't want anybody around me that's not qualified, right, to do their job.
A lot of times I think with family members, we bypass our own hiring processes that we know that we should do.
Yeah.
And
we look the other way.
For us, a lot of it is attitude, aptitude. And then we use some tools like get it, want it, capability to do it. Do they align with our values? And so if you run family members through that same, give them the same employment offers that you would give everyone else. Write it down. What's expected? Give them their KRAs, right? What's their key results areas? What are they accountable to? And hold them accountable to it.
Right. And if at all possible, let them answer to somebody else besides you, if at all possible. If not, then, hey, deal with them. But if you can. Hey, what about our guest today, man? Paul Edwards brings the goods today. I mean, I learned a lot about Paul. I knew Paul and known Paul for a long time, but man, this ghostwriting thing he's doing is the real deal. I mean, he really lays it out in the interview, the steps that you need to take. And he got you all excited for a minute and then he scared you and we had to go back and kind of revisit what some of that looks like. But man, I really enjoyed the interview today.
Yeah. He's passionate about writing, man. There's no question about that. And like that comes across, too, like, as you listen through this interview, I think one of the things we're going to recognize is he's very methodical. Like he's got a system and a process that he follows. Right. Which sometimes that sounds boring. Like just frankly, right. Sometimes that's like, oh man, really? This sounds like a lot of work. You want
a guy writing your book. Right?
Yeah. You think like, wow, somebody put this much effort into it. Maybe it may sound boring to me. It may sound like, oh my gosh. Yeah. But it's like, wow.
No, this dude's on his game. He has fun with me. He mimics me because he can sound like me. He's always saying, like, I would try to mimic it, but all I got to do is talk. And that's the way he sounds, right? He's always using that. But man, he's got such a gift for being able to, right, get inside of your head. And he knows what you're thinking. He almost finished my sentence oftentimes. And he can say, right, he's just an incredible content creator. And I'm excited for you guys today to hear the interview. So, man, let's bring Paul in and get started.
Yeah. All right. Hey, let's get Paul in here.
Hey, Paul, I'm pretty excited, man, that you were able to join us at View from the Top today. So, man, how's it been?
Big A, Kev, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Things are on the up and up, have been on a learning year for me. A lot of learning, a lot of digging deep, but I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, tell us what you're excited about right now. Break it down. Tell us what you're learning and tell us a little bit more about you. Maybe we've left out some important things. And so tell us what you're excited about.
Well, I would say what's become exciting for me. It didn't feel exciting at the start, but I've been on this journey this year. You always want to be just on an up and up. That's what we all want as entrepreneurs and business owners, but it doesn't always work that way. And I'm learning to become really excited about about going through these essential parts of business that I was just trying to dodge or outsource or push, try and pay someone else to do. And God's like, no, you got to learn like everybody else, and you aren't moving anywhere. You aren't going forward until you hunker down and make it happen and learn to do it yourself. And so for a while that was kind of painful. I was a little bit angry about it, but eventually I said, I've been through this before, this kind of thing where I'm just banging my head against the wall. So I'm going to learn to love it. And so that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah. How did you do that mindset shift? Like, it was like, you're going to learn the lesson the hard way and you're just willing to adopt it now and go through it? Or did it take an incident? Like, how did you make that mindset shift?
Probably a little bit of both. So I was nearly out of business in July. I mean, I was down to like nothing, and I had to make some drastic changes with some stuff that I had had been on autopilot for me, some expenses I was used to paying for, and I had to cut back on that. Had to make some changes with, how I ran things. Had to pay a lot more attention to these tiny little details. And so for me, I hearkened back to my experience as a veteran, right? Being in Iraq, they couldn't trust me, my leadership there, to get the job done. So they stuck me on guard duty for the first 6 months of my first deployment. And eventually I got so fed up with being on guard duty that I said, I will do whatever it takes to get out of this. And so what I ended up saying was, tell me what you want done, how you want it done, when you want it done. I'll do it to standards. I'll never complain. Give me a shot to be on the mission. And was this really what I wanted to do with my life? No, it was pretty straightforward work, but it was the work God gave me at the time. And when I embraced it, I ended up having some of the most fun I've ever had on the second half of that deployment. So it's just it's a repetition at a higher level. But eventually I could see it. I was like, yeah, I need to do this and I need to learn to love it.
Paul, are you just that hard-headed, or are you stubborn, or you like to learn the lessons the difficult way? What do you think it is there?
My bride would probably answer that question in the resoundingly affirmative.
We need to get Shannon on here. We need to find out from her, right? So we can tweak the dials a little bit. Hey, I want to compliment you on something. You got some great kids. Paul came to Nashville not long ago, and he brought Grant with him. He's got another son named Chase. And Grant and I sat there, and we had the most delightful conversation. He asked great questions, and I kept trying to go back to Paul, and he'd have another question, and then I would answer his question. Then he would ask me a question, and I'm like, Paul, we're glad you brought Grant because he and I are having a great conversation. But me and Grant bonded. I mean, it was like really fun. Mm-hmm. And you've done such a spectacular job with those kids. And so you're not too hard-headed in every area. You've done something right in the parenting. So way to go there. Thank you. Talk to us about your business, the Reluctant Thought Leader. You're doing really good right now. You're doing some really cool things related to ghostwriting, and there's some other content creation that you're doing. And I have some really specific questions to ask a ghostwriter. You're the first ghostwriter that we've interviewed, and I've got some real specific questions around that. So tell us a little bit more about the Reluctant Thought Leader.
Well, thanks, Big A. I would say the Reluctant Thought Leader is me, and it's also my target client. There's basically, I see it as two different ways to go about being in the thought leadership space. You can either be very aggressively self-promoting, and I'm not knocking that, right? But I'm also aware of how uncomfortable I would feel doing something like that, like going out there and saying, hey, beating my chest, look how much money I made, look if I get on the private jets, look at, all this kind of stuff. Or there's this other side where you can be much more preoccupied with what kind of impact do you want to create and what kind of experiences do you want to have as a result of publishing your wisdom and sharing it with the world. What do you want to see happen? You could be very visionary about it. And I said, now that's much more aligned with how I see the world, with everything I've been through and all of the bad experiences I've had trying it the first way and banging my head against the wall there. And so I reached this point, you know it well, I reached this point in my life where I had to offer to the market something that they would actually buy. And when I did, hands began to go up left and right. I need help with that. I need help with that. And the service was writing content in your voice. And for me, it was one of those things. It was like I had been brought up in a very well-spoken English household where we use proper English, young man. And I was also the mimic. I was the guy who in the army, they would say, Edwards, do the impression of the colonel, and I would do the impression. So not surprisingly, the opportunity came up where I got to be Big A on paper for a little while. And I got to try this and I got to try that.
That's right. I need you to come to my house and lead these calls sometimes, and you would be impactful. But you do a great job of really not only outwardly speaking, like doing the fun stuff, but you really listen so intently that you really kind of become that person. That's what's so cool about what you're doing today is this, you learn it so well. It's like you almost can finish the sentence, right? And so how did you learn that skill? Is that just something innate that you just had? Is this something that you've practiced? How do you listen so intently that you can be that person?
Part of it is pure gift from God. But when I was a kid, my parents had, back in those days, they still had long playing records, right? Turntables. And they had these comedy records.
You have to explain that because half the audience don't even know what a record or an album or a turntable is. But anyway, we'll get to that a different day. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I would play music, but they also had stand-up comedy ones from like Bill Cosby and this Irish comedian that I was really into. And I was just sort of left by myself quite a bit. And I was allowed to play with Dad's hi-fi with his stereo system. And so I'd put these records on and I'd listen to them and I'd laugh. And then eventually I would just sort of start reciting it. It was like I listened to it so many times that I had what would you say, a phonographic memory, not a photographic. I had a memory for sound.
Yeah.
And then I would listen to, I've listened to all kinds of things. So I'd listen to Jesus Christ Superstar. They had a copy of that. I memorized the entire libretto. I could sing the rock opera from front to back. And I knew all the lyrics. And then I got into pop music and I knew all of Michael Jackson's lyrics and all that. So I had the entire movie scripts memorized. It's something with my hearing. I've always had really sharp hearing, and I've had a really easy time with English, with pronouncing words, because my father sat me down like 3 years old and made me read the newspaper, not a little kid's book. I was reading the Edmonton Journal at 3 years old and pronouncing the words phonetically, and he was guiding me through it. So God-given by my dad, acquired naturally through interests, and it just sort of snowballed from there.
Well, it's a great gift, and you're using it in a powerful way today. But a lot of people are wanting to write a book. I know I went through this exercise a number of years ago, and I've had the pleasure of writing a couple of books, and had some people help me along the way. But a lot of people, they have difficulty even putting together more than 2 or 3 sentences, right? Or even a few paragraphs. And they're like, man, where do I go from here? Why do you think people struggle with that? And how can you help them overcome maybe some of those obstacles?
Sure. So a lot of people come to me, and the surface-based reasons they get is, I don't have time. I'm not a really good writer. This isn't really something that interests me, but I know I should do it, or I know I could create a greater impact by doing it. And so one of the questions I'll ask them is, well, if you didn't do a book, how do you get your message out now? And they'll tell me things like, oh, I go on podcasts, or oh, I go and I give speeches, or I'll give seminars and training. And I'm like, well, all you're doing there is the audio version, the video and audio version of what I do on paper. There's a different structure to it. There's a process you got to follow to make it legible and interesting to read, but it's really no different. You're telling stories, you're presenting permanent principles, and you're showing, like, it's almost like a before and after photo, right? And everybody who goes through a transformation has a before and after photo, or they should. All I'm doing is taking that same principle and applying it to the written word. So there's that part of it. The other part of it that I tell people is, if you're hesitant on writing a book, the first thing you got to get really clear on is who is your audience, right? So if you're writing books like the kind that I do, which is mainly targeted at a business owner, a CEO, somebody looking to make impact beyond their organic marketplace, then you want to know, who am I writing to? You got to be clear about who that is. You got to define them. You got to find out what they think. Do they have unifying characteristics? Is there any particular niche that you're writing to? You got to know, you got to be very clear on what your message is. What problem can you solve? How can you help them? What have you learned that is valuable to the people you're sending that message to? And then on top of that, what's the call to action? So don't write a book just for its own sake, right? We want to write a book to spur people on to further action. Now, that could be a book spurring donors on to further action, or shareholders. It could be investors. It could be customers. It could be any group of people. What their response is varies from one audience to the next, but you do want to make sure that you trigger a response. You don't want to
What do you say to the person out there that says, Paul, there's a lot of books out there. I mean, even on the topics that I speak about, like, how could I possibly add anything more than that's already out there? Like on any topic, what would you say to that person?
What I like to tell people is, yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of books out there on that topic, but there's only one you. There's only one you. Only you have lived through your stories and your versions and your experiences that combine into that book. And if it were true, let's take the personal development space where we all swim and breathe. If it were true that one person had every solution to every personal development problem that exists throughout the globe, there would only be one book. But there isn't. There's a multitude of them. Also, as a side note, I don't know how true this is, right? But I've seen it published in related content that the as many books as there are, that represents less than 1% of the amount of books that are attempted. Meaning that if you actually get that book to the finish line, you're breathing very rarefied air. I don't care how big Amazon's library is. So just to put it in perspective.
So would people serve themselves well to getting a coach, a ghostwriter? Should they try it on their own first? What would be my approach? If you didn't know I had written a book, what would you tell me that I should do? What are some of the key things that I should do initially? Is it reach out to someone? Is it to get, an outline? Like, where do I start?
Yeah. So we're breaking this down right now, as a matter of fact, into course content, but there's a planning phase, then there's a writing phase, then there's an editing phase, a publishing phase, and a marketing phase. And the interesting thing is all of those phases are all going on at the same time. So that it's not linear. So there's stuff you should do in the beginning that is planning, obviously. There's writing you should do in the beginning. There's marketing you should do in the beginning. There's at least thinking about publishing and editing, as those tend to fall towards the end of the process in the linear sense. I would say the very first thing is, like I mentioned at the beginning, who are we writing to? What message are we sending? And what's the call to action? Another big one, I know you're a big fan of this, Big A, is why. Why do I want to write this book? Because if you don't have a solid why, right? I just want to reach more people. Well, that's better than nothing. But it really ought to be core to you, because a lot of books get started and stopped because we're not really clear on why we want to do it. So you have to be clear on that. You get more into that, it becomes more practical. It's about knowing what are those renewable topics that I can go back to time and time and time again, and I never run out of stuff to say about them. And then I've got some other tools that I take people through on a strategy call where I say, what's the journey of your reader? So, our not my mutual friend, I've never met the man, but I believe Donald Miller is a friend of yours, and he has the hero's journey. I borrowed that and I said, well, what's a reader's hero's journey? So how do we take them and bring the guide alongside them, help them overcome their hesitations and fears and problems, and lead them into the promised land?
Actually, don't know Donald Miller. Dan Miller, you may be confusing him with him, but he is an excellent author and he writes amazing books. And so I do wish that I knew him personally, but I don't. So I just want to clarify that. Some of this stuff sounds pretty scary, right? I mean, to the novice out there, they're like,
can I jump in here? Can I jump real quick? That is me right there. I have this idea that I want to write a book about based on my experience and the opportunities God's given me in life. Sure. And literally everything you said, I was halfway convinced, before we get on this call, I think I really want to do this. And now I'm like a little more scared. Mm-hmm. So I understand you had to explain all that, right, to get the full context. But what about someone like myself who's listening and they're like, I have this idea. I think I want to write a book. What is practically the next step for me to, I'm assuming, get some kind of momentum?
Sure. Kev, I've had a lot of clients now in the past few months join me for a 90-minute strategy session. And we get them from zero to at least they've got a plan that they can follow. So even if you don't want to engage a ghostwriter or an author coach, but you do say to yourself, if I just sort of had some real fundamentals nailed down, then I could write. Then I wouldn't be confused. I'd have a true north that I could return to and recalibrate as I went through the writing. And a lot of people are more than qualified to do that. What I've found is that most of the time when I'm actually ghostwriting for someone, it's not because they can't write. It's because that would take such a significant amount of time and energy and focus away from their primary occupation and need and their business and all that it's just much better for them to dictate their thoughts in an interview. And then away we go. and we write the copy, and we just back and forth until it's done. But I understand. I mean, that's part of the reason I have to present it this way, or I feel like I have to present it this way, is because perception is very off from reality when it comes to writing a book. Some people think it's a Word doc. I just write a bunch of words in a Word doc. Now, I'm not saying that's you. What I am saying is there's a lot of detail that goes into doing it in a way that when you get to the end of it, you feel very satisfied and very accomplished that this product is truly, authentically what you envisioned at the beginning. And I recommend against doing it by yourself. Can be done, but for a lot of people, it works way better when you have a team surrounding you.
It's such a learning curve. You can, right? It would take forever and a day to do that. Let's just use Wally as your example here for a second. What would you do with him practically? Like, you would get him on a virtual call and you would interview him, you would record him, he would write things and send it to you. Like, what does that look like for the audience?
Sure. Yeah. So there would be, most of the time our clients are available for an hour a week to do a live interview over Zoom. I shouldn't say live, just an interview recorded over Zoom. And from that, we're able to extract stories and match them up to, those key principles. So, if you've noticed, a lot of really memorable and well-known books are known for having a number of different things they're going to talk about, such as the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or Jordan Peterson has 12 Rules for Life, right? So everybody's going to have a set of those kind of things. And that's usually what we're trying to do, is we're trying to take those principles and make the persuasive case through storytelling. So it sounds complicated. It's not. You get on a Zoom call and you talk for an hour. But when it shows up on paper, it's transcribed. It's not just transcribed, it's translated into how it should read on paper. And it leads that reader inexorably as they go through the book towards that inevitable conclusion, the call to action, go to the next step with the author of this book.
You've got a real succinct way in order to formulate that once you've done the interview. And so for the people listening today, if you can just tell the story, you can go back and you can add the flavoring to it. You can put it in a very succinct order where it makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a chronological order, and then prompt them. And see, that's what I love about you, is because you don't have to just sit down and figure it out. You're prompting the people. You're getting the story out of them, and you're working together to formulate that journey. I love how you said that it's important that you do it for a reason, not just for the sake of writing a book, right? Talk about the call to actions. What would that look like for some people?
With a lot of people, see, this is another critical piece you need to consider, because some people want to write a book to build a community. Others, it's to raise funds for a cause. Others, it's to get more clients. Others, it's to communicate a vision, right? And so there's so many different ways to spin that. What I try to tell people is keep it very consistent. Don't do too many different calls to action. Like, if you've got a lot of different products or a lot of different offers, don't do that. Make this book tied to an offer that's going to lead to ultimately to your big ticket offer. If you can lead directly to it, like if you're a consultant and you work with Fortune 100 companies, well, then any executive reading that book is going to have a pretty good idea what your call to action is. Just make it your call to action. But generally speaking, what we're trying to do is get to the next level of engagement that's appropriate for that audience. So in one of the recent ones we worked on, it's an executive and life coach, and he will either work with people individually or he'll work with them in a group setting. And so in both cases, what we were doing was taking portions of that book that we'd already written and suggesting ways to repurpose that into a piece of content that would draw that person into the funnel. So, for example, we were talking about he's really strong with the different personality types like DISC and the StrengthsFinder. So he built in surveys that people could take, linked directly to his website, and that would begin the process of nurturing people into the funnel. For other calls to action, not quite the same. And I hope I'm answering your question here, Big A, because
that's good. That's good. Yeah, I was just helping people understand that it's called CTA, call to action. There needs to be something in there so people know what to do after they read the book, right? It's like pointing us to something. Switching gears for just a second, if I could. We hear a lot of people talking about self-publishing. We hear people talking about getting a publisher. Any sense of direction you can give people as to which way they should consider that?
Yeah, so I don't portend here to be the same as a publisher. I just have relationships with them. My experience has led me more trending towards that a first-time author who doesn't have a huge audience and is attempting to build one, generally, the self-publishing route is the most cost-effective, and it's the least obligatory, meaning that most publishers, whether it's hybrid or traditional, are going to have some sort of longer-term objective with whatever book project they take on to publish. Now, you can't look at that just in terms of what sort of commitment you're making to buy X number of books or agree to that, whatever a traditional publishing house might put toward you. But you do have to think about, okay, if I sign on to that agreement, do I have the publicity machine built to make it worth their while and mine? Otherwise, if you don't have much of that marketing machine built and you're just publishing a book that you really just want to hand out to people here and there, maybe do a couple speaking engagements, that kind of thing, I tend to think self-publishing is a better route, just because there's not as much attached to it longer term.
The publishers are really interested in your audience, how big your social media platforms are, what you're willing to do to promote. And so there's some challenges that go along with that. There's pros and cons, I'm sure, both ways as it relates to that. Paul, not only in ghostwriting, but you've been involved in other content creation. And I'm just curious, a lot of people are out there today creating their own content. How do we know when we're ready to automate it or to outsource content? Because all of our job roles change periodically, and it's like, man, should I be focusing on continuing to create this? Should I outsource it? Should I automate it in some way? Can you give any tips related to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Big A. And what I would say, first of all, is a lot of people think with content that the only way to get it widespread is paid advertising or paid positioning, such as getting published in Forbes or Inc. or something like that, where you pay a fee to get placement. That's one way you can do it. But if you have a really strong organic network built around you of people who would be willing to share, willing to interview you, willing to publish your blog as a guest blog on theirs, in exchange, do a blog swap, that kind of thing, what I tell people is first tap into that network. Why? Because anybody who's creating content on a regular basis, especially if that's their business model, is always looking for extra content to fill the gap. And if you can come along and provide a piece of content like that, and it's backlinked to your website, then you're going to ratchet up your engagement just a little bit by getting featured on their blog or on their podcast. Also, there's all the goodwill that it creates, as you know, from being a podcast guest on so many shows. So as far as the automating it through technology, I think when you reach a saturation point in your organic outreach, and now you really want to push into new territory that's well beyond your ability to influence, well, then you can look at, I think it makes more sense at that time to look at a paid strategy if you're going to use one. As far as outsourcing it goes, what I tell people there is there's a couple different ways to look at it. One of them is obviously economic. So let's call the elephant in the room. If you start spending $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a month on creating content, and it doesn't have there's no strategy for recouping the investment, very quickly you're going to get tired of it. You're going to say, I could spend those dollars elsewhere. This is producing nice content, but there's nothing I can do with it because I don't have a strategy to deploy it and convert it. So what I tell people there is it's better to have a strategy, or it's better to go into it knowing I'm using it for a different purpose than converting off of it. That's the economic reason. Again, I go back to the same reason with a book, right? Aside from the economic reason, you got to have a why that will last you long beyond the first couple of blogs you write. And so if you have that why, but then you're like, yeah, but I've got all this stuff. This stuff is in my head. I can't get it out onto paper. I get stuck. I have other competing priorities. I can't devote time to it. Then it can make sense to outsource it and bring in a team to do it for you.
Everybody's always looking for shortcuts and things like that. I'm guilty of that. You're guilty of that. We're all guilty of that. But you've got a really cool way to help people understand that there's really a 4-step secret to writing like 1,600 words in an hour. Yeah. Like, take us through that process. Thank you for sharing. I could sit here and ask you questions all night. I want to be respectful of you, but walk through that with us just for a second. How do I write 1,600 words in an hour or less?
Okay, so first of all, we're talking here about a draft, not a finished product. So nobody get out there and thinking, oh, I'm going to write a perfectly written. No, that's not what I'm talking about.
A couple of hours, you'll be done with your book.
Done is better than perfect. And you still need an editor for this. But 1,600 words is a lot more than 20 and getting stuck. So the way I again, I'm not this. This is nothing original. I pay attention to the original creative manual in Genesis, right? It tells us how creative activity takes place. There was evening and then there was morning. There was evening and then there was morning. The second day, rinse, lather, repeat. Right. Now, we read that in English and we think, oh, what lovely poetic imagery. Oh, that's so soaring and majestic. Well, the Hebrews are reading it like rinse, lather, repeat, rinse, lather, repeat. They're saying, oh, he's telling us this is how creative work is done, because they're interpreting it as a manual, whereas we're interpreting it as a narrative. So I said, okay, well then, what's the lesson to be learned with that, with creative writing? It means there needs to be an intermission. So when I'm going to sit down and write a blog, the first thing I do is I say, okay, the actual writing of this blog takes place tomorrow in the morning after I've had a good night's sleep and 8 hours for my subconscious to meditate on what I outlined tonight. So you reverse engineer that, right? It's where I live, it's 4:48 in the afternoon. If I was going to write a blog tomorrow morning, then the thing I would do after we get off this call is write my outline. 3 major points. What am I talking about? Why does the audience need to know it? How do they apply it? A couple of sub bullets for each. Maybe come up with a title, draft title. What's the call to action? 15 minutes, put that away, go be with the family, sleep overnight, wake up, write it first thing in the morning. Now, I thought this was only me because it was working for me until Cody on my team came to me and said, I'm dreading this next blog I got to write for this other client. I said, what's the matter? He said, it's only 1,200 words, but it takes me like 3 hours to get through it. I said, Cody, you got to be kidding me. 3 hours to write 1,200 words? He said, yeah. I said, no. Tonight, we're doing this differently. I want you to outline what you're going to write, sleep on it, and write it in the morning. A day went by, I didn't hear anything. Then 2 days went by. And he messages me on Slack. He says, I just wrote 2 blogs in 1 hour. Not 1, 2. Now, he's a professional writer, but still, right? I mean, anybody who has basic English skills can do more than they would if they would not try and pack all of that creative work into one session that they're hoping lasts 10 minutes or less. Because that's not the way it works. But if you divide the work, and you outline it and plan it, and then your subconscious says, oh, that's what we're working on. Okay, well, then it sleeps on that overnight. And then you wake up in the morning, you look at that outline, you're like Neo in the Matrix, I know Kung Fu, right? You're like, all of a sudden you're writing and you can't stop. And I was like, and once it started happening for Cody, I was like, okay, then it's not just me. And that means more people can benefit from this.
Oh, what's the number one most important thing that you believe every author needs?
Now, that's a good question, Big A. I haven't thought about that before.
Every author.
One thing.
Yeah. What's an important thing that every author needs?
If I was going to put one thing, I'd say burning desire.
Yeah, I like that.
Because what I usually tell people is you got to have burning desire, you got to have the resources, and you got to have a basic ability to communicate. But if you only have burning desire, you can still get a book done.
So, Wally, when are you going to sign up with Paul? You need to get your book out because you're a smart dude, and the things that you have to offer, I need to read.
I think I just got stuck on burning desire.
You did. I know, but we got to move. I got
to get that burning desire, man.
There's a lot of our audience out there today that has a burning desire, and they don't know fundamentally how to walk through this. And so, Paul, tell our listeners how they can reach you if they're interested in pursuing this and they want to learn more. Tell them how they can reach you, and then a very familiar terminology we use here called a full cup. I want you to share a full cup with our audience.
Sure. Thanks for that, Big A. MeetPaulEdwards.com is a website I created just so you can reach out and get in contact with me. And I give away a digital copy of my most recent book when you're there. So would love for you to have that. So meet, as in meet, shake hands and meet, PaulEdwards.com is the URL. Also, I'm just now starting. I know this is the time of recording. I don't know when this is going to go live, but frequently on LinkedIn and Facebook, I'll be sharing a series of webinar workshops that I'm doing with a partner content creator, and we're going to go through all of this in detail. And so, if anybody wants to register for those, scroll through my feed on LinkedIn, Facebook. You'll be able to find a post to one of them, and we're going to be doing them pretty regularly.
Any cost associated with attending those, or can they just come and learn?
No, they're free.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Now, for a full cup, this is another case of my hard-headedness, Big A. This is where I was forced to bend to reality. But actually, you were on a podcast I was listening to, so you had a hand in this, even though you weren't aware of it. And that is, I have struggled so much with sales, and not because I'm not a good listener, not because I don't have confidence in what I offer, but I think it's all come down to, I don't know what type of personality I'm dealing with half the time. And a friend of mine, Brian Ahern is his name, he asked the question one time. He said, one person, if you ask for the sale today, you won't get it. Another person, if you don't ask for the sale today, you won't get it. And do you know which one you're dealing with? I've never forgotten that question. I say that to say that my full cup is I have been nerding out like crazy on the Enneagram. And part of the reason is I heard you on a podcast one day and you're busy telling the host that you're an 8, which doesn't surprise me at all. I'm a 4, which is why I'm such a deep sea diver of the soul. And I have dug into this. I got my bride and my 2 sons into it. Now they're figuring it out. And it's making it so much easier to tell what sort of person I'm dealing with. And I can tell just by certain things they say, right? And certain behaviors. I'm like, oh, that looks 7-ish. That looks 2-ish. Okay, pull on the thread a little bit more. I would encourage, you don't have to use the Enneagram. You could use DISC. You could use StrengthsFinder. You can use the Myers-Briggs, whatever. But get to know different types of people better because it's so helpful, right? It's like, oh, I'm dealing with an 8. Okay, I can just straight talk, and they won't be offended. Oh, I'm dealing with a 1, like my bride. Better not imply that she's doing anything poorly or messing anything up. They don't like that, right? So I just find it really helpful. I encourage anybody to dig into that sort of thing.
What a great full cup. Man, I recommend that highly as well. It's helped me a lot with our team, with the people that we work with each and every day. Paul Edwards, the reluctant thought leader. Man, if you're interested in getting a book on the shelf, you need to reach out to Paul at Meet Paul Edwards and .com, I think it was. Is what it's in the show notes. And so you guys reach out. Paul, thank you for being here with us today. Wally, good to see
Thanks,
you as
Paul.
always. You guys have a great rest of the evening. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Paul is just a great guy. He's got great insight. He's one of the best content creators, I think, on the planet. And his ability to ghostwrite and really understand who we are, I think can really help us get our message out to the world. So listen, I want you to take what he's taught you today and go out and build your own view from the top.
If you're interested in learning more about who we are, you can track us down at viewfromthetop.com, or you can email us at pod, that's POD, at viewfromthetop.com. See y'all next week.